hello, welcome back to the channel. It's me, Emily Ecology, and you join me here in the Divide today. So, continuing to work through the DLCs that take you to different regions and the kind of ecology side of the different regions, which I think is really good. You know, the fact that the DLCs don't just take you to just another, part of the Mojave Desert, it takes you to different locations that have quite different things going on in them, and you can see that a lot has happened in this particular location. So the Divide has got a really kind of interesting and complicated history to it, and you come here, the Lonesome Road DLC, as at the behest of Ulysses, who was also a courier and a member of Caesar's Legion. And Ulysses is one of my favourite characters in all of Fallout. I think he's a fascinating man. The story of him and the way he thinks about things and stuff, I just think he's a very, very interesting character. So I do actually want to do a bit of a deep dive into Ulysses at some point, into his character and his history and all of that kind of stuff, because as I say, I think it's really, really interesting. So firstly, where exactly is the Divide? So we're obviously on a new separate map from the Mojave Wasteland, and it is located to the west of the Mojave Desert, and it does sit between Nevada and California, in what's described as Badlands. So Badlands are a dry terrain that's been subject to a lot of erosion by wind and water, so not necessarily strictly a desert, but kind of desert adjacent type of land, so probably less kind of water than a more temperate region, but there's been a lot of changes to the landscape from water and from wind that has eroded the stone and created a lot of dust and things, and that's something that is going to be kind of relevant to us here. So there are a couple of recently built towns in this area, and by recent I mean they were built kind of before the Great War, sometime in the 21st century. So we've got Hopeville, where there's missile base and stuff, and then we've got Ashton as well, which is another kind of town that was built here. And the goal with these towns was they were supposed to serve as a brilliant example of the American dream, the idea that anyone can make a perfect life for themselves in America with white picket fences and cheerful communities, and it's all wonderful and everything's great. But these towns were built on a huge network of nuclear missile silos as well, so that was kind of an interesting choice. And there is, I mean, you saw on the map there, you kind of start out the game going into the Oakville missile base. That's kind of how you get into the DLC, and then you kind of work your way through until you get to where Ulysses is, which is also a nuclear missile base, as you can see from the symbol on the map there. But there's a bit of a problem with them building missile silos and things underground, because this is a region that's geologically unstable and prone to earthquakes. It's a fault line. So if we go to, I don't know if I have the location here. Yeah, so there is somewhere we can actually find a computer, I believe. Here it is. Oh, just on the scenery. Here we go, Jackie's computer. So, Jackie presumably worked here, so she says if she loses one more night of sleep over these noises, she's going to strangle somebody, knocking pipes. Do you think it's easy running the safety protocols for an entire ICBM launch complex on tour sleep? It's a miracle nobody started World War III over a low-flying titmouse. So, yeah. And then she's talking about there's earthquakes. Sure, they're minor ones, nothing to worry about, but earthquakes, did no one think to check fault lines before they built a massive underground missile complex? So, yeah. Basically, this location sits right on a fault line, which means it is prone to a lot of earthquakes, which, parts of kind of California and that part of the United States is is well known for being prone to that. And then, yeah, she's saying that she thinks that the last one was a 5.0, and then the data's corrupted. Not sure exactly what happened to poor Jackie, but there we go. So yeah, that's one of the issues with this location, is it sits right on a fault line. And the other issue is that the US Army decided to allow the scientists at Big Mountain to use the location, use Hopeville to test their weather control research. So you can imagine how well that went. If you've played Old World Blues, I'm sure you can figure out it didn't go particularly well. They also rounded up residents who were protesting the war and shipped them off to the mad scientists to become test subjects. But most of the missiles here were never actually launched. For whatever reason, it didn't really happen when the war broke out. So, while the US was hit with a lot of nukes, not all of the US's own nukes were actually launched at all, which is interesting to note. So when we come into the post-war period in this location, so after the bombs and everything that's happened, the harsh weather made it a difficult place to traverse and to live in, because there was a lot of windstorms and things happened, and the kind of earthquakes and stuff. So it was difficult to live here, but people did it anyway. So a community started to grow. People that lived in the Divide made a home there, and it was all thanks to a particular brave courier who was willing to walk the dangerous roads. And they called it the Divide because it was a bridge between the East and West, and certainly had a lot of potential to become a really great new nation that would unite the bull and the bear. That didn't happen. Understandably, we know that. The NCR and the Legion fought for control of the area, because for the NCR, they wanted it to reduce the traffic on the Long 15 and make it easier to move troops and resources between the NCR's home territory and the Mojave. And the Legion didn't want the NCR to have that advantage, so they were fighting over the control of the region. And the Divide ended up getting dragged into the ongoing conflict between the NCR and Caesar's Legion. And then the courier, the same courier, and spoiler alert, it's your player character is the courier, brought a package from Navarro which contained Eddie, the cute little robot, and it essentially activated missiles and sent launch codes, but because so much time had passed, the missile silos couldn't open, so a lot of these nuclear missiles basically detonated while still underground, right over a fault line, which triggered a massive earthquake and ripped the land open and kicked up some really, really nasty dust storms that can literally flay a man alive. And we know that because of the marked men we can see up there. Which we have talked about, the marked men and what happened to them. They're ghouls, but they're not feral ghouls. They are just angry ghouls that lose their skin because of all the dust and the winds and things. I mean, today in the Divide, it's a relatively nice and calm day, and you can see the effect of the earthquakes and the explosions and things, because all of these buildings are on their side and upside down. There's a big chunk of road that's collapsed from up there. It's a bit of a mess. So to look at the sort of specific ecology of the Divide, the fault line is one called the Pahrump Valley fault line, and faults are fractures in the rock and the Earth's crust, and they have been kind of displaced, so they tend to be around where tectonic plates are in the Earth's crust, and they move against each other, and that friction is what causes earthquakes. So active faults can pose a major risk to infrastructure and buildings, as the earthquakes affect the stability of the land. And if they happen out at sea, they can obviously trigger tsunamis, which can also be extremely dangerous. It's well known there's been so many incidents of earthquakes and tsunamis causing loss of life as well as significant damage. A very serious example being the nuclear reactor meltdown at Fukushima, which was caused by a tsunami, and that's still having consequences to this day for people. So it is something that, if you are planning on building a bunch of underground missile silos, maybe check the fault line map before you break ground, just to make sure that you're putting it in a place where this kind of thing isn't likely to happen. But yeah, so the land here is very unstable. It's created this kind of canyon almost through the region, because there's just been so much damage and the buildings are all collapsing, and it's still pretty unstable. It's damaged the structural integrity of the buildings, it's damaged the infrastructure, so the municipal I can never say this word, municipal infrastructure. So we can see we've got a big water pipe that's just pouring water into the ground, because obviously all the underground pipe work and everything has been damaged as well. We've got power lines collapsed here. It's all done. It's all broken, and the area remains unstable, because even there are points when you're making your way along the Lonesome Road where you see buildings collapsing in front of you. It's still happening that eventually some of these buildings, they're still in a precarious position, and then gravity eventually takes over, or something else happens that kind of disturbs and causes movement, and that's enough to cause them to collapse. So it's still kind of happening. And you combine that with the wind and the dust storms and the questionable weather control testing from the mad scientists. It's a huge mess, and it's made this region, a very dangerous place to traverse, which is probably why it's supposed to be the kind of last journey that the courier goes on after everything else is said and done. Thereabouts, that was kind of how it was sold to us, because they don't want it's not recommended for you to come here straight off the bat at the beginning of the game, even though the entrance to the divide is pretty close to where you start the game, because it's just up from Prim. But you're better waiting until later in the game to come here, because it is definitely a challenging location to traverse. And in terms of survival needs, there's really not much here. You can see obviously a lot of damage. We do have water. There's no sort of natural water sources here. It's a dry location. There's no river. There's no lakes or anything like that. It's only here where we obviously, this location is quite near Ulysses' temple. We've got the wastewater treatment plant and the waste disposal station. And then, there's a hotel. So, this was obviously part of the sewage network and the water supply for the region. And that's created a sort of lake, but that lake's been created by the damage done to the location. It's not been formed naturally like a river or a lake that would be. So there is water available. Obviously downside, like pretty much everything else here, it is radioactive. There's a lot of radiation around this location, certainly, because there's a lot of nuclear warheads around. And there's also a history of nuclear warheads being detonated, which is going to then produce a lot more radiation. So it's not great water, and there's really not a lot of options other than that, other than if you get lucky and you find some purified water in containers or in, inside buildings or whatnot, which you can sometimes find. But, we've got, these are military crates, because there was obviously military bases in this location as well. People lived here, but there was also, we've got a lot of the kind of military bases and things. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff around. And certainly in terms of food, it's really difficult to find any food beyond that. The crates do have the MREs, which are meals ready to eat. They're kind of pre-packaged meals that, military personnel will carry when they're out in the field and they're doing things, because obviously, you might not have the capacity to have a fully fitted kitchen to cook. So it's a way of having, nutrition of some sort available to them wherever they go. And you can find that stuff, and you can buy them from the commissaries that you can find round about. Conveniently, they take bottle caps, and there is a good in-game explanation for that, which I quite like, is that the soldiers were given tokens for the commissaries to spend on whatever they wanted, but they just happened to be the same size and shape as bottle caps. And then they had the whole issue because they were using bottle caps to buy stuff, and which I quite like, because obviously bottle caps being the main currency, but how could you use it in like vending machines and things from before the war? But I do like that they do put that little explanation in there for why you're allowed to use the bottle caps on these things, which is great. Um, but as you can probably tell, everything is all stone and grey and dirt here. Plant life is really not something that you tend to see much in the Divide at all. And probably partly that there's maybe not quite as much rainfall as other places, but I think a big reason for that is the windstorms and the dust storms that we see. They're, delicate plants, especially, young seedlings and things, when they first start growing out of the ground, they're quite delicate until they've had more time to grow a thicker, kind of outer layer of bark and whatever else. Plants can be tough, but when they're, sort of newly kind of growing out of the ground and they're still seedlings, they're really quite delicate at that stage. So a strong wind, a lot of dust could, rip them up and do a lot of damage to them to stop them from growing, as well as the dust storms potentially blocking the sunlight, which obviously plants need to have access to sunlight in order to grow. And that's not something that's as readily available here as it is in other places, as today, as we can see. But a lot of the time the dust kind of obscures that and reduces the amount of sunlight, and that's going to have an impact on how plants grow as well. In terms of living things, again, there really isn't much of that around here. We've only got a handful of creatures. One of which being the mole rats. Now, they do tend to live underground, although these guys are on the surface. We've got a little baby one, which is nice. But yeah, I know you've got big teeth. But they are herbivores generally. They do eat kind of roots and things like that. And in terms of being affected by the dust storms, one of the interesting facts about the naked mole rats is that they don't really feel pain. Now, generally, as a rule, because I did see there was a bit of a conversation on social media about somebody doing something really horrible to a fish, and the fact that people don't think that fish can feel pain. But as a general rule, anything that has a nervous system can feel pain. It doesn't matter. Dogs, cats, reptiles, birds, they do feel pain. They maybe don't show it as well. Animals are really, really good at masking pain, but they can still experience it. But mole rats are different. They are a bit weird in that sense, because they lack a substance called substance P, which is an important thing for pain sensation, which is called nociception. So that, substance P is involved in pain sensation and pain transmission through the nervous system and things. But mole rats don't really have that. So in terms of pain, they're pretty resistant to pain compared to a lot of other animals, which is an interesting little fact about them. I say, like, these guys are obviously a bit strange. They are mutated, but even the real ones are quite bizarre little creatures, actually. Very, very interesting. So they're generally quite happy. If they live underground most of the time, they're safer from the dust storms and stuff anyway. So they're quite happy living their best life. There's not really any humans here other than yourself and Ulysses. The other kind of humanoids that we see are the marked men, who, as I said, they're ghouls that have been flayed, so they've lost their skin to these dust storms. Because what's one thing about when people become ghouls is that their skin loses a lot of its integrity, and that's why sometimes, you know, they lose their noses and things and they look kind of rotten. But for these guys, what's happened to them is that they've essentially the dust storms and the wind have taken their skin off of them, which is horrendously painful, as you might imagine. So yeah, you can see how kind of red their skin looks, and that's because you're not seeing skin, you're seeing the muscle underneath. Muscle is a really kind of dark red colour like that. But they're not feral, they still use guns, they wear armour, they can plan attacks, and they make little campsites and things, so they're very, very angry, and probably in a horrendous amount of pain, but they're not feral, they're just aggressive. So presumably they'll eat a similar diet to what your normal non-feral ghouls eat. They can eat things that humans would find off-putting, so stuff that's kind of rotten. They will just eat whatever they can get their hands on, whatever they can find. But they're maybe a bit more picky than, you know, feral ghouls tend to just scavenge whatever. So they're maybe a wee bit more picky than feral ghouls are, but they're still gonna just be like normal ghouls. And then we have to look at our apex predators. So we have two kinds here, and we have the death claws, which are basically always going to be an apex predator in any kind of situation where death claws exist. The ones here are actually a bit tougher than the Mojave variant that you see. So something to kind of keep in mind, that, you know, they have higher health and higher damage output and things, if I remember rightly, but they are a bit tougher than the ones that we're used to from the Mojave, which are, you know, dangerous enough. You do come across them in a few places. Yeah, see, where can I get in? See, it's not stable, it collapsed. That just gave me such a heart attack. Oh my god. Yeah, so as I was saying, ground isn't safe, it's not stable. You need to have the laser detonator to get back out. Is there anything useful in here? Radio distress beacon, yeah. So there is, you can find some stories about kind of the NCR stuff, so you need to use the detonator and then you can blow that warhead up and then you can get back out that way. But yeah, I forgot that was a thing. But yeah, that was the thing that just happened. I even have the laser detonator. I must have. Yeah. Couldn't get this far in the DLC without it. Okay. There's supposed to be something in here. There's supposed to be a death claw in here. Oh, there is. It's well camouflaged. Here we go. Oh, I can't use VATS while I'm using that thing. Roar, yeah. So yeah, there is a death claw, and then of course you come through here and the cave collapses and you get trapped with it. I've got combat turned off, so that's why it's just glaring at me. But yeah, the death claws are here. They're big, strong and aggressive. But the other group that you come across is the tunnelers, and they're kind of unique to this area. Very, very interesting creatures. I have done a whole video on them as well. Get away from this water because it's very loud. The tunnelers, unsurprisingly, live underground, hence the name. Kind of makes sense. So Let's see if I can. I probably can't get back to the Cave of the Abaddon. What might? Yeah, let's just. Find some of them. Are they here? No, they're not here. Okay. So yeah, the Cave of the Abaddon, which, if you take a closer look at the ceiling, is a bunch of collapsed like housing buildings and hotels. There's a swimming pool making up part of the roof, upside down. So the tunnelers are very, very interesting creatures, and they are roughly human sized, maybe slightly smaller, sort of reptilian in appearance. And they are mutated humans. That's been pretty much confirmed. And they were kind of trapped underground when the bombs fell, and they've taken on a reptilian appearance. And they don't like sunlight. They are scared of fire and things. They prefer to be in the dark. So when the nukes were detonated here underground, it ripped open their sky, as it's put. They basically were then exposed to the surface for the first time. And a single tunneler isn't that dangerous to be dangerous enough to be an apex predator on its own, except maybe the queen, which you normally find here. I must have killed them on this save file, so they're not here anymore. That might be her, actually, or that's tunnel. Yeah, we've got dead ones. So the queen is quite dangerous alone, but the problem with these guys is that they don't attack alone. They burrow and they work as kind of ambush predators, really. So they'll hide and wait for something to walk by and then attack. But they attack in groups, and you do get a little set piece when you first come into this location where you see a Deathclaw walking past, and it's set about by a bunch of tunnelers, and they kill it very quickly, and that's to show you that, you know, these things are dangerous. They've just taken out a Deathclaw in like 3 seconds, so be careful. You know, so you get to see that. So if you're not prepared, then they can do a lot of damage, and they definitely appear to be carnivorous, or at least omnivorous, you know, eating both plants and animal things, and probably, you know, they are hunt to kill, and their behaviour is certainly kind of like an ambush predator, so it does seem likely that whatever they kill, they will eat. So basically nothing here is safe except Eddie the robot, and maybe Ulysses if you can talk him round at the end. So this final road is one that you have to walk alone, sort of. It's kind of funny, it's called the Lonesome Road, but it's the only DLC where you really have a companion the whole way through. um, or nearly the whole way through. I mean, you do have temporary companions and dead money, but in this one you can have Eddie for most of the DLC until you get to the end. But it is really a harsh and unforgiving place. The ground is unstable. There's nasty and aggressive wildlife basically everywhere you go. There's no plants, there's no sunlight. It's just a mess. So you do really need to be prepared, because this place is definitely not conducive to good survival. It's going to be a rough time, but it's kind of the point. It's supposed to be your kind of final challenge, so that makes sense. But one thing that I think the divide and everything that we see here highlights is that radiation is not the only or even the main barrier to survival in this post-apocalyptic world for plants, animals, or people. There's many other factors, and the instability of the area and the nasty dust storms is really what makes the biggest impact on the fact that there's very little alive here. You know, you really don't see plants in the same way as you do in the Mojave. desert, where there's plenty of cacti and joshua trees and all the rest of it. There's plant life in the desert, but here there's not really. And radiation is obviously a problem. It does have an impact on things, but certainly in the divide, it's all the other factors, the physical instability of the region, the buildings that were all built by humans that are just collapsed and things and still collapsing, and the dust storms that make it really hard to survive in such a place. And it means that it's a place where only the toughest of creatures are actually going to be able to live here. And that's what makes it so dangerous. So it's very, very interesting location, and definitely, yeah, it's a fun place to explore. Um, and I definitely enjoyed playing through Lonesome Road, but it's the hubris of man, I suppose, thinking that we're above nature and that we can just do whatever we want, and clearly that wasn't the case, because why were we building underground missile silos right over a fault line? Because the earthquakes aren't going to go well, and that's exactly what happened here. But the mole rats are happy at least, which is nice. We just got a baby one, so that's good. I like the mole rats. Yeah, so hopefully you find that interesting. I would love to know if any of you guys have a favourite sort of DLC for all of Fallout in terms of the location, more than kind of gameplay and story and stuff. Do you have a favourite location to explore? Because I struggle to answer that question, because I really do like them all. I love Lonesome Road. Old World Blues is always my favourite, I would say. But I really love Lonesome Road. I think Zion's great. Nuka World is really good. Far Harbour's brilliant. It's a fascinating place. I'm looking forward to getting stuck into the ecology of Far Harbour, because there's a lot to talk about for that location. It's fascinating. But yeah, I think it's been really good. So let me know, and I will sign off for now, and we'll be back on Tuesday. We're going to visit actually the Nuka-Cola plant in Fallout 3 and talk about some of the shenanigans that happened there, and maybe even deliver the Nuka-Cola Clear formula. So that's going to be on Tuesday, so I will catch you guys then. Bye.